How y'all doing? It's a big crowd here. Got lots of good material for you. I'm way too loud. I'll talk more softly. Got your attention. My name is Justin Carlson. I'm the Director of Technology in our Hill Learning System, our technology platform that we use for our reading program. I will say you got to give us some time to get our audio dialed in because we're streaming and doing this live, so it's kind of doubled everything for us. But welcome to Hill Learning Center. We're glad to have you here. Who is here for the first time? Awesome, great. Well, we're really happy to be working with NCIDA and Data Dyslexia. This is our third year, I believe, and we're so happy to be working with them. So welcome everyone to help with them. As you may know, I won't go into a big what is Hill, but we're a school for students with learning differences, as well as a teacher training center that trains in those methods we use in our school. So we kind of work both with students here, but with teachers out in public and private schools to help work with them, working with students who struggle. So this is very near and dear to our heart. I won't go into much more about Hill, but if you do have questions, we'd be happy to give you more information, take a tour. If I could put some of our own folks on the spot. If you're from Hill, could you raise your hand? These exceptional educators would be happy to talk to you about any questions you have. Okay, don't ask me, ask one of them. Okay, I get one official slide here today. It's this one. They always give me this one. The tech stuff. So we are endeavoring to stream this live at the same time, which we did last year. We feel like we're light years ahead this year, so we're really going to knock it out of the park this year. One little funny thing is, if you're streaming right now, you've already done all this, and you can see this slide. So congratulations, streamers. I now see that I'm standing in the wrong spot. Sorry about that, Chris. There's the streaming spot. So if you're seeing this already, you did a good job, and you can stream. If you're not, if you're maybe watching this later or something, know that you can, you can go to this address right here, tech@hillcenter.org. We are monitoring that right now. We can help you with any tech support. And we sent out a message yesterday that had this information so you can get digital copies of all the handouts. So if for some reason you're having problems but you're connected enough to see this, send an email to tech@hillcenter.org and we'll help you. It rings on my phone and rings on Chris's phone there in the back if it comes in immediately. If you're in the room and maybe your neighbor's calling you and saying, hey, I can't connect or I'm having a problem, have them email tech@hillcenter.org and we will help them. And if they need this link to this materials, it came out in the pre-email yesterday with all of this. So we did share this. I think that is the main info. Yes? Okay. All right. There are, this is for everybody, there are additional materials in this participant folder. I went in there yesterday. There is a bunch of stuff, well, it's a good stuff. So in addition to what you have in your folders, everyone, not just the streamers, should go to this link, which should be in your materials, but also was in that email that went out yesterday. And if you need that, just let us know. I'll get it for you again. But lots of good stuff in there. And I think throughout the day there'll be things in there. Okay, I've taken you said you didn't need all your 8 minutes, so I've taken most of those, and I haven't even started my jokes yet, so. Okay, there aren't going to be jokes, that was it. All right, I'm out. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the 2019 Day of Dyslexia. My name is Chris Cox, and I'm currently the president of the North Carolina chapter of the International Dyslexia Association. The mission of the IDA is to create a future for all individuals who struggle with dyslexia and other related reading differences so that they may have richer, more robust lives and access to the tools and resources they need. The North Carolina chapter was founded in 1986. The goals of the founders of our branch included board representation across the state, outreach and professional training for teachers and tutors, creation of a parent network of support, and in general dispensing of information about dyslexia, including research and education. Currently, the goals of the NCIDA remain those of our founders. We strive to honor their work and provide information and support in the state of North Carolina to individuals with dyslexia, their families, and professionals. At this time, I would like to ask the current board members to rise when I call your name. Region 1, Laura Daniels. Region 2, Nancy Brewer and Janet Rogers. Region 3, Beth Couch. Region 5, Lynn Lozier, Cynthia Mabe, and Sarah Gray Horn. Region 6, Jeanette Meacham and Pryor Rayburn. Region 8, Nancy Kaufman and Deb Luckett. I'd also like to thank the volunteers who made today possible: Kathy Russell, Karen Marsh, Ashley Haynes, Christine Keith, Ashley Allred. So thank you to the Outreach Committee and volunteers for making today happen. I'd like to review our thanks to our sponsors who are listed on the screen. Everyone should have an agenda in their packet. We will begin with a video, and after our incredible keynote, Nancy Kaufman, we will have a brief break and then a Q&A panel. After that break, following the panel, we will have a wonderful presentation by Donna Gargett. At the conclusion of the event, we will hold our annual membership meeting at 12:30. We will have a few raffle events along the way. If Jeanette would like to speak to that.
Or you can cash out with y'all. But thank you all for coming.
Thank you for sharing your Saturday with us, and please know we would love for you to get involved with the NCIDA. There's a lot of work to do, and we would love your help. We're going to start with our video by Dr. Tim Odegaard.
But have you taken time? What it is, when to take it, and how much. This is kind of important stuff. And given that this is a big deal, you're probably not surprised that reading is linked to health outcomes. Reading is truly a life skill that most of us take for granted. I mean, if you think about it, why shouldn't most of us? We learned how to read in school, and it's just something we picked up. It's something we could do. But this is not the reality for the people who struggle with reading due to dyslexia. Reading ability falls along a continuum. Some individuals are great superstar readers, while others are just average. But then there's people who are below average to well below average. Individuals with dyslexia fall towards the lower end of this continuum. Dyslexia is a brain-based type of learning disability that specifically impairs a person's ability to read. Dyslexia is characterized by difficulties with accurate and fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. Decoding is our ability to sound out words to read them. Dyslexia is extremely prevalent and is the most common learning disability. The ability for all children to read is influenced by multiple factors that interact with one another to bring about reading success. One of these factors is motivation. With that said, dyslexia is not the result of a child being lazy or not trying hard enough. Children with dyslexia can work just as hard and even harder than the other kids in their class and still struggle to read. All of this effort will achieve little if these children are not provided with the appropriate instruction to address their needs. Environmental factors also impact reading achievement, and solid, core classroom reading instruction is critical for the success of all students. But dyslexia is not the result of poor core reading instruction. Don't get me wrong, our schools can be improved, but individuals with dyslexia can be found in even the best of schools. During the early grades, the majority of children respond to high-quality, direct reading instruction, but some kids do not respond to this high-quality instruction, and parents and teachers alike are left wondering why these kids are not learning to read. For many of these kids, the reason could be dyslexia, but there is hope for these individuals. Children and adults with dyslexia can learn to read when provided with appropriate instruction that addresses their educational needs. Individuals with dyslexia require direct, intensive, systematic, cumulative reading instruction. But why don't they respond to less intensive quality instruction like many other students? The answer is in part due to neurobiological differences observed in individuals with dyslexia. One of the risk factors is a family history of dyslexia, and it is well documented that dyslexia runs in families and has a genetic component. Our genes provide the blueprints for our brain, and dyslexia is a brain-based learning difference. My research and the research of many others provides a better understanding of this brain basis. Reading is supported by areas of the brain that allow us to produce and understand language. These language areas work with the visual centers and learning circuits of the brain to support reading development. This distributed network of brain regions allows a person to understand written language. Individuals with dyslexia show differences in areas of this distributed network. Differences can be seen in functional brain scans taken while individuals perform reading tasks. Differences are also seen on structural brain scans, and the wiring that connects the areas of the brain involved in reading differ between individuals with dyslexia and their typically developing peers. Another part of the answer to the question, what causes dyslexia, can be found in how we process language at a cognitive level in support of reading. But before we consider the cognitive components of dyslexia, we first need to consider the different components of reading. The ultimate goal of reading is to comprehend text. If comprehension does not occur, then a person has not read. But we can't comprehend a text if we do not have the skills needed to identify the words on the page. And we use our ability to understand spoken language to comprehend written language. Our ability to understand spoken language is supported by many skills, more than I can capture in a single figure. But to highlight a few, children need a wide vocabulary, background knowledge of the topic being discussed. They need to be aware of the meaning units within words, and they need to know how words are put together to form meaningful expressions. Children also need to be able to read print fluently. When reading aloud, they should be able to read quickly with expression. Fluent reading requires an ability to efficiently and accurately identify individual words. The identification of written words is supported by an ability to sound out individual words. This is the skill of decoding, and to identify words by sight word reading. Sounding out words to identify them is supported by knowing our letters, their formation, and the sounds that go with them in the language. Sounding out words is also supported by the ability to hear the internal structure of words and isolate the individual sound units that make up words. For example, there are 3 sound units in the word huff. Proficient readers are highly accurate in word reading and the skills that support reading words. Proficient readers are also highly efficient and automatic in word reading. And just as phonological awareness supports the development of accurate word reading that is needed to allow students to develop proficient word reading skills, rapid automatized naming supports the speed by which a person can read words. Pulling a word from memory or effortlessly decoding a word is supported by our ability to efficiently go from print to sound, to go from seeing something to being able to access its name. So now let's turn back to the cognitive basis of dyslexia for many individuals. Remember, dyslexia is characterized by underachievement in accurate and/or fluent word reading. Individuals with dyslexia also often struggle with sounding out and reading words. But why is it that a child can have such a selective deficit in areas of written language? The reading deficits of individuals with dyslexia often stem from a problem with processing the sound structure of language. These aspects of language are phonological awareness and rapid automatized naming. When these components are deficient, we commonly observe corresponding deficits in reading accuracy and fluency. Deficits in word reading ability give rise to an issue with comprehending text. And learning new vocabulary, we often forget that most of the vocabulary that we learn comes from reading. It isn't possible to directly teach all the vocabulary necessary to support language development and listening and reading comprehension. So students who struggle with word-level reading skills often lag behind their peers in learning new vocabulary. Notice that I've not mentioned that dyslexia is a generalized learning disability. Well, because it's not. I've not said that these kids are dumb or lazy, because that's not true. They're not throwaway kids or adults. These individuals have a very selective deficit that limits their ability to learn how to read. And they need more intensive, direct, systematic reading instruction than others. But when they receive this instruction, they will learn how to read. Here at MTSU and the Tennessee Center for Dyslexia, we are striving to help raise awareness about the success that these children can achieve. We want to help parents, educators, and policymakers become aware of what these needs are, so that collectively we can work together to make sure that we strive to meet these needs. So look forward to more future videos such as this to help raise awareness about other aspects of dyslexia.
There's a link to that wonderful video in the resources for further learning list that's in your packet. I'd like to invite Nancy Kaufman to the front. Nancy Kaufman is the director of the Shelton Academic Reading Approach, known as SARA, for the June Shelton School and Evaluation Center in Dallas, Texas. She taught learning different students, oversaw the alphabetic phonics program at the Shelton School, and was an original contributor to the Shelton model for organization and study skills. Nancy holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of the South, a master's degree in special education from Vanderbilt University, is a certified academic language therapist, a qualified instructor in alphabetic phonics, and an adjunct instructor for Dallas Baptist University. In addition to providing training in structured literacy to teach teachers both nationally and internationally, she is a frequent speaker at conferences related to serving students who learn differently. Nancy is a member of the International Dyslexia Association, previously serving on the board and on the Standards and Practices Subcommittee, the board of the North Carolina IDA branch, the International Multisensory Structured Language Education Council, and the Academic Language Therapy Association, known as ALTA. Nancy is a past president of both the Alliance for Accreditation and Certification of Structured Language Education, and of ALTA. Most importantly, Nancy is the proud parent of 3 children, 2 of whom are diagnosed with dyslexia. These 2 children, now successful adults, ignited her passion for serving students who learn differently. Nancy lives in Asheville, North Carolina. Thank you, Nancy.
slides keyed up.
Okay. It's such a privilege and a pleasure to be here with you all. So whenever I'm in a room of people who are interested, or if we think of a continuum, interested or passionate about serving individuals with dyslexia, I feel like I'm with my tribe, with my people, because it is such an important part of my life, and has certainly been a guiding principle, I guess I could say, even before I realized what was pulling me along. So I feel like I have the authority to come and talk to you all today as an educator and as a parent. So I'll talk about the parent part closer to the end. I am from the Shelton School in Dallas, which, similar to the Hill Center, we are a school for learning different children, and we're also a teacher training center. So if you know someone from Dallas, or you live in, well, there is actually someone from Dallas in the room, but anyway, other than me, then I would encourage you to check out that website. So I wanted to give us a little bit of background about the history of dyslexia, because so often we hear, oh, this is a new phenomena, and that is just not true. All the way back in 1877, Adolf Kussmaul coined the phrase word blindness. Now, Kussmaul and others were looking at adults who had had some sort of an injury or an illness that had caused them to lose the ability to read. And so we see evidence of documentation of this as far back as 1877. And then also, in 1887, Rudolf Berlin in Germany applied the term of dyslexia. So this is the first time we ever saw the word dyslexia related to this phenomena of having good vision but not being able to read. Again, he's looking at adults who had had some sort of an injury to the brain. And then we can see that if you have a total lesion, then you completely can't read. And then a partial lesion results in great difficulty. And Berlin was looking at dyslexia as part of the aphasia category. So if there are any of you all in the room who are speech-language pathologists, this makes sense to you. In 1895, James Henselwood, who was an ophthalmologist, gave a detailed description of acquired word blindness from a stroke victim. And you're thinking, well, you've already told us that. But we're going to hear about James Henselwood further along. He saw this difficulty with reading was primary, not related to a visual disability. And I'm harping on this because there are individuals who think that reading is a vision problem and that we can correct it using visual techniques. And that's just not true. So, and I'll get into that a little bit more. In 1896, we see the first documentation of congenital word blindness, if you will. It was not called dyslexia at this time, by Dr. Pringle Morgan. And he wrote about a student that he was seeing, and I've forgotten his name. Anyway, he was talking about this child, and I think if you read this descriptor, it sounds like our kids, you know? Smarter than the average bear, picking up on all kinds of other things, but for some reason they're not picking up on that basic literacy skill. Often the first clue is they're not associating the sounds with the letters. They can't learn the alphabet. And even though they've gotten good instruction, they're still struggling, and it doesn't make any sense. I actually think that's the best red flag, is something's wrong here. This is a bright kid. Why aren't they learning to read? So this was the first description of congenital, and I'm going to do my air quotes, word blindness. So we're going to, if we look at the early 1900s, James Henselwood, the ophthalmologist I mentioned a minute ago, started looking at this in multiple children. And so he documented dozens of cases of this congenital word blindness, and they fit that same description. Smart, even smarter and quicker in other respects than other children. They have one deficit, being able to read, being able to be taught to read. Now, Henselwood encouraged schools. I can't do a presentation to educators without putting this in here, because Henselwood told us what to do in 1904. It's now been, clearly over 100 years. Provide appropriate teaching methods to these children. Give them individual, and I would add individualized reading instruction, short lessons, and don't make them read aloud in class. Now, we see notation of dyslexia pretty much around the world at about the same time. And I put this slide in here because we often hear, oh, dyslexia is an English problem because English is so crazy. Well, that's not true either. So are there methods that can successfully address dyslexia? Is that a recent development? And again, the answer is no. In the 1920s, and we start to see a lot happening in the 1920s, which coincidentally is when public education became compensatory in the U.S. So you see there's sort of you could look at the timeline, the cause effect of that. So now we're educating larger groups of children, more of the population. And Grace Fernald had students trace letters and numbers and say the names aloud. So this is really the first, what we look at as multisensory instruction that we now know is so important. And she called it the VAKT approach: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile. Now, I'm going to digress here for just a moment. So the International Dyslexia Association was formerly known as the Orton Dyslexia Society. It was ODS. I had to stop for a minute and think of what it was. And it was the Orton Society because Samuel Orton we think of as the father of what we now call structured literacy. Dr. Orton was a neurologist, and he referred to this phenomena of the bright child who has difficulty learning to read as strephosymbolia, twisted symbols. I am so thankful to Dr. Orton for all the work that he did. I'm so glad we didn't stick with strephosymbolia. Anyway, Dr. Orton hypothesized that the difficulty lay in an incomplete cerebral dominance. So Dr. Orton understood that these children had something different going on in their brain. He had no ability to look at what was happening in the brain or to look at the anatomy of the brain, and yet he understood that there was some sort of I hate to use the word dysfunction because there's so much functioning well in those brains, but anyway. He adopted the multisensory approach of Fernald, and God bless him, he got to be a friend with a psychologist who worked with him to develop multisensory instruction known as the Orton-Gillingham approach, and you all probably heard about Orton-Gillingham. And thank goodness, Anna Gillingham was friends with Bessie Stillman, who was a remedial reading teacher. Because for those of us in the room who are teachers, you know that it's great to have theory, but you really need a manual. And so Stillman encouraged them to come up with a manual and describe the methods that they were going to use. And the rationale was that if we could embed kinesthetic activities to help establish that visual auditory association. So what you see and what you hear through the symbol or grapheme and phoneme sound correspondence, that and reinforcing that left to right progression, which is so critical for language, because reading, as Dr. Odegaard said, has to do with being able to map those, I'm paraphrasing and stealing a little bit from Louisa Moats, mapping those sounds to the symbols to put together to make words that you know so that you can then understand. Current research provides a lot of support for identification and treatment for dyslexia. And I want to go back for a minute, because when I said God bless Samuel Orton for working with a psychologist and a teacher, because that sort of set the tone for what is so important and I think is so critical now and so helpful now, is that scientists and educators like Dr. Odegaard are working together so that we're not just guessing and coming up with cutesy ways to address this phenomena. We're actually using science so that we can predict that what we're doing will actually have a positive impact on our children, on our students. Speaking of science, in 1983, the doctors Shayowitz, Sally and Bennett Shayowitz, began the Connecticut longitudinal study. They followed children. Their goal was to follow these children from kindergarten into high school. Well, now those children have grown up and are having children, and they're continuing to follow them, which has been fabulous for our field. They started out wanting to answer the questions of, what's the difference between a good reader and a poor reader? What are the behavioral differences? How prevalent is dyslexia? So it's from their research that we get that great demographic knowledge or information about, the 1 in 5. I'm sure you all have heard that, that prevalence. And we get that from the work of the Shayowitz. And they also wanted to know, is it a developmental lag that children outgrow, or is it persistent over time? I'm shaking my head because when my daughter, that you'll hear about in a little bit, was in first grade, her first grade teacher on parent night held up the book, Leo the Late Learner or something. I hate that book. I hate that book because it sort of perpetuates that, oh, they'll be fine. Let's just wait and see. Don't wait and see. You wouldn't wait and see if you woke up with a fever to see if you were going to get sick. You're already sick, right? Anyway, I digress. And the Shayowitz had the great benefit, we have the great benefit, that they had access to functional MRIs. And you saw some of the research that Dr. Odegaard has done in his slides of the brain. Because at this point in time, unlike Dr. Orton, they were able to see what is happening in the brain when we read. And what's the difference in what's happening in the brain when someone who just takes to reading somewhat naturally, although we know it's not actually natural, but for those for whom reading comes easily, what's happening in their brains that's different from what's happening in the brain of a smart child who's having difficulty. So we get great information about that then informs our instruction. In the 1990s, we started seeing information about how important understanding the sound system of our language is, so that the phonological awareness component. We started to see more research about how that was a critical component. Doctors Bradley and Bryant found that training a young child to attend to the sounds in spoken words before they start school significantly improves their success in learning to read later on. Think about all those rhyming games that we just sort of naturally play with young children. Turns out that's pretty important. Dr. Patricia Kuhl, K-U-H-L, has done some research with language acquisition and finds that across languages, we as adults play with sounds with young children. You think about the song Old MacDonald, E-I-E-I-O. So we elongate those vowel sounds, which are the most, you can't read if you don't know vowels, right? Because then you wouldn't open your mouth for vowel sounds. But so we are genetically prone to do that as humans, to reinforce that, elongate those sounds. We know that reading has two major components, decoding and comprehension, as Dr. Odegaard discussed. If you don't understand the sound structure, if you're not accurately processing those individual sounds, it interferes with your decoding. because you don't have that individual sound to attach to a symbol. So it really is at a very basic level. Comprehension may or may not be impacted. So you'll have children who can't rhyme, but who understand clearly when we speak to them. So I'm going to go through the definition of dyslexia that was adopted by IDA in 2002. So here it is all together, and I'm going to break it down into individual sentences. So it's a specific learning disability that's neurological in origin. In other words, there's a difference in the way the brain is formed and in the way the brain functions. And these are the reading systems of the brain that Dr. Odegaard alluded to. Broca's area, where we articulate, where we analyze words in terms of sound. I'm going to jump back here to the occipital temporal lobe, which is where we look at word form. And then, this is a gross generalization. And then the parietal temporal lobe is where we sort of coordinate all that information to read. So this is what, from the work of the Shayowitz, this is what the activity looks like in the brain of an average reader. Look at the difference in the brain activity in an individual with dyslexia. Now, what I'm not showing you is that there are other things happening on the other side of the brain. This is the left side, which we think of as the language side. And so what we see is there's an overactivation in the front of the brain, but a pretty significant underactivation in the back of the brain. So we know there's a neural signature of individuals with dyslexia. What's interesting is when we see individuals get really strong structured literacy instruction, we do see some a difference in brain functioning. So when your child, or when we as educators are working with children using good, strong techniques, we really are changing the way their brains function around reading. No pressure. It's characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition, poor spelling, and decoding abilities. So these are students that misread common words in a variety of ways. It's very inconsistent. Their reading is choppy or hesitant. It's almost like they're stumbling through. They lack flow, and their spelling is just kind of a mess. These difficulties, as I've already talked about, typically result from a deficit in the phonological component. So that understanding of the sound structure. So these are children who may not get rhyming games. They mispronounce common words. They get frustrated. Are they flustered or frustrated? I don't know, but they don't have good phonemic awareness. They might like biscotti as another sort of common. They can't speak Pig Latin. Pig Latin is a very sophisticated, complicated phonological awareness skill. You've got to hear a word or think of a word and hold that sound sequence in your memory. You've got to pull off that initial sound, delete it, move it to the end, manipulate it, put it on the end and add a. So if you don't have good phonological awareness, you're not going to speak Pig Latin. So if you can speak Pig Latin, the odds of you being dyslexic are pretty low. You can't reverse it, unfortunately. Now, I mentioned earlier that I think the biggest red flag is that surprise component. It is unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities. So we see children, as I've already talked about, who are clearly bright. They demonstrate cognitive abilities in other areas. And they get accused of not trying. Yeah, if you just try as hard in reading as you do in math, then you'd be fine. That's just not true. They've figured out where they get the most benefit for their energies. So if they work hard in math, they do really well, they get lots of acclamation, whereas if they try really hard in reading, not much happens. So they're allocating their resources wisely. These difficulties in reading are a surprise. It's also unexpected in relation to the having received good classroom instruction. So they've gone to good schools, they have attentive, supportive parents who've read to them. I'm smiling as a mother of children with dyslexia. And these difficulties are a mystery. It doesn't make sense. The secondary consequences can include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that then impedes the growth of that vocabulary and background knowledge. So we see that listening comprehension is stronger than reading comprehension. And reading is difficult, so they don't do it. And what we know about vocabulary is that after about the 3rd grade, most of our vocabulary we pick up through what we read. You're sure not going to get it from primetime television, let's just be honest. And we don't even those of us who think we're pretty well educated, the vocabulary that we use in everyday discourse is really not that sophisticated. But the vocabulary that we see in books is. So after about 3rd grade, that's where we get most of our vocabulary. And we call that the Matthew effect. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. So the less you read, the less vocabulary you have, and the less exposure to background knowledge that you need to help make other connections. I thought I had another slide in there that I don't. But when we think about reading and the number of books that we read, not only are we missing out on vocabulary, but as I said, you're missing out on background knowledge as well. So the child who's able to read the books that are in their sort of in their social circle or their what their peers are reading, if they're not able to read those, then they're also not picking up on that story structure, sentence structure, and they don't have that opportunity to visit about those books and then talk about those ideas. And for that reason, I encourage those of you who are parents, get audiobooks for your children, because they can understand it. They just may not be able to read it right now. I talked about that to a group of parents once, and the dad came to see me a couple of weeks later, and he said that they had started doing that. And he said he was driving carpool, and his son was talking to his peers, and they were talking about they'd seen the Harry Potter movie. And his son said, yeah, the movie was good, but you know, the book was so much better. And he said, I'm driving along and tears were just streaming down my face because they had listened to the book together. So where can we get good, reliable information? Well, you're in the right spot. And I have to say, I joined IDA in 1991, and it's been such a great resource of information for me as a parent and as an educator. You can count on the information that you get from IDA, and certainly NCIDA. I can say this because I'm new. I'm so impressed with NCIDA and the work that they do across this state. And I live over on one side, and then there are other board members that live, sort of leaning out over the ocean. But it is a great source of information. Understood.org is a great resource as well. That's more, IDA is national too. Now for teacher training, it's so important to have a teacher that knows about the structure of reading and knows how to address difficulties. And I think that's such an important thing for all of us to push for, is for better teacher training. And so you want to be sure that you get that training from a reliable resource. North Carolina has quite a few that have been accredited by either MSLIC or AOGPE. Orton-Gillingham is not a trademarked term, so be careful, because there are wonderful Orton-Gillingham programs in our state. And there are other Orton-Gillingham programs that you'll hear about that I don't know whether they're good or not because they haven't gone through accreditation. So that's when you get peer reviewed. And IDA also has an accreditation program. For support for students, again, you want to have someone that is certified. ALTA is a certifying body, the Academy certifies, and HillRAP, Hill also certifies through their training program. And I'm sure there are many others. Again, I'm new, so I may be unaware of some. But you always want to ask about the extent of training, because sometimes people will say, well, for example, in Texas, oh, I was trained by Shelton. Oh, really? How much training did you have? Well, I went to a workshop. No. You really need someone who's had more extensive training, that understands the structure of the language and the techniques that have been scientifically proven to be the most effective. Oh, this was the slide I thought was earlier. This is where I can get on my bandwagon about why it's so important for those audiobooks. Because you look at the difference, and I'll just give you a quick how they put this together, and they would be the Shayowitz. So they interviewed, don't you know that was fun, children in the 4th grade, and they asked them how much they read outside of school, and then they plotted what the students reported against their reading scores. So they found that children that were at the 10th percentile reported that they read under a minute a day. The average reader, 50th percentile, read under 5 minutes a day outside of school. The students at the 90th percentile reported that they read 20 minutes a day outside of school. These are the rich who are getting richer. But again, we can provide audiobooks for these children so that they have the same exposure to that story structure. And you think about it, these children have sat in the barnyard with Charlotte and Wilbur. They've run through the woods with Katniss. They've played Quidditch with Harry Potter. They've held hands with Atticus Finch. So that richness of the story that you only get from the words, from the book. I have a 4-year-old grandson, and I went over, and his mom was in the middle of reading him a book, and he said, Nana, you finish the book. So I sat down next to him, and I said, well, catch me up on the story. And he looked up at me, and he said, Nana, there are words on the page. Print awareness, very important. So why is our work important? Well, this person was born in 1922. He was a poor reader. He got no support or intervention. He was told he was dumb. He believed he was dumb. This person was born in 1984, a poor reader. She received a strong structured literacy program. She was told she was smart, She believed she was smart. That's my dad. He just turned 95. And that's my daughter. So my dad served his country in World War II as a pilot. He started a business that supported 3 generations. I started harping on him because he was smart until he was 5, and then he went to school. And I started harping on him when I started studying dyslexia. When he was 75, he said, I think you're right. I'm not dumb, I'm dyslexia. So for 70 years, he thought he was dumb. What was interesting is he started reading every day. Now that finger, that wrinkled finger, goes across the page slowly, but he reads every day. It's been a great comfort to him. He's 95. He said, I'm sure I've read some of these books before, but I don't really remember them. So there he is, surrounded by his genetic material. This is my Maggie. She's now Dr. Maggie. You can see she has degrees from some fairly prestigious universities, and her degree's in history. So the indicator for her was that she couldn't learn the alphabet. And so we got her tested and then got the treatment that she used. So she never doubted her intellect. So from not being able to learn the alphabet, now she can read and then write about what she read in history. I'm just a little proud. And my grandson is in there, you just can't see him. So our work is important because we give students access to their intellect. And it's what has inspired me to do the work that I do. Because we do change lives. So thank you.
A wonderful overview of the history of dyslexia. I love the personal stories that you shared as well. Just want to give a couple of announcements. Chris mentioned the handout that's in the online folder called Resources for Further Learning. So it's 2 pages of books, of podcasts, of webinars, of fact sheets. It's a slew of information. So there's also information on there to learn more about structured literacy that Nancy mentioned. So I encourage you to make sure that you go into that online folder and look for those resources. The other thing is that you have some note cards on your table, some index cards. We will be having a panel shortly that Chris will tell you about. Those note cards are for if you have any questions. Nancy will be on the panel. Or if any questions you had an opportunity to ask those when you registered. And I hope our virtual participants, if you had questions, you entered those at that time, because we won't be able to take questions from our virtual participants during the session. But if you have questions, just put those on the note card and we'll come around and collect those during break. We are going to take a 10-minute break. And during that time, I encourage you to look at the back table. Is a table of resources, just some of our IDA board members' favorite resources that we use. So I encourage you to take a moment to look there. And then Donna Gargett, who's our second keynote speaker, who does blank canvas art and does some wonderful artwork with students with dyslexia for self-expression. If you go straight through the hallway here into the next set of double doors in the atrium, Donna has some fantastic artwork set up there by students with dyslexia that she's worked with, including students here at the Hill Center. So we'll have 2 breaks, and those are both opportunities for you to kind of look at some of those resources. So I'm going to go ahead. What time is it? 9:57. So let's come back at 10:10 and be back in your seats to start the panel at that point. Okay? Jeanette? Yes, thank you. Yes, we will have one raffle drawing right after the break. So if you are interested in making a donation and increasing your chances to win one of the raffle prizes, that's something else for you to take care of during this break. Okay, thank you.
and we will collect them. At this time, we're going to draw for our first raffle. Lynn is making her way up. I love you. Okay, this is for the glass wind chime. Laura, will you pull the number? Oh dear, the print. The winner is number 3811757. The winner of the glass wind chime is 3811757. Check your tickets.
Let's do this one next, and then we'll come back to that.
Okay, while y'all are still looking for your ticket,
This is for
The-
Shelton morphine deck and study skills notebook.
this is for the Shelton Study Skills Notebook and Morpheme Deck.
Oh, it's one, okay, okay. So the first one's for the morphine deck.
Okay, this is for the morphine deck. We practiced. The morpheme deck. The winner is 3811833. It was meant to be. Yes. And now for the notebook. Three, 811-834. Is this a prank? Okay, let's look. For the book, 3811834.
834, the last three.
834.
All right, draw another one. Draw another card.
I love this. And back to the wind chime. 757 are the last three digits.
757. So I draw again? Draw again. All right, it's gone. Lost your
3811743. 743. Oh, yay.
Yay. All right, 743. Pick another one. Maybe it'll be 843 this time.
753.
Yay.
Yay.
All right.
Wow. I'm tagging someone else in for the next one. I just wanted to also let everyone know that we personally invited the current state superintendent as well as all of the candidates to attend, just for your FYI. I'd like to introduce the candidate. Sorry, I wish. I'm introducing the panel members. I'll start with Laura Daniels, who's a parent as well as an educator. We have Dr. Deirdre Christie, an educational psychologist. Leo Morris, a student at Durham Academy. Jacob Green, a student at Adkins High School in Winston-Salem. Kim Von Wee, our parent. Nancy Kaufman, a consultant and past IDA president.
Chris, excuse me. That's the wrong Nancy. That's Nancy Hennessy.
Nobody needed to know that. She could be the past president. Jeanette Meacham, our parent advocate, and Janet Rogers is our moderator today. Thank you.
So while he's clipping these on me, I want you to know that it is never too late in life to have a new title. I've never had title or the role of a moderator. I've had many other names, some are nice, some maybe not so nice. So I've had many roles in my 36 years of being in special education. But this is my first role in moderator, so y'all be very gentle to me, if you will, please. Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and our first question is for Deidre. As a 7th grade ELA and social studies teacher, how do I request that a student be tested for dyslexia? And how do I bring to the team the need for specific testing, and how do I make sure it is on the IEP? So I should have prefaced this by many of the questions are multiple. So if you want me just to go back to the first question, and then we can start from there, maybe all the other answers will come.
Okay, sounds good. And I had downloaded your list.
Okay, good.
All right. So, first of all, you wave your magic wand, and as a teacher, and I'm assuming this is coming from a public school teacher, but even if it's from an independent school teacher, most schools will have care teams to make referrals about concerns about students, and those may be called different things. They may be called MTSS teams, student support team. They may be called different things at the early stages, and then ultimately, if there are sufficient concerns to follow that through, that would be referred to the Exceptional Children's Program coordinator. So teachers are an incredibly important part of that process. And so clearly this question, kudos for first being a middle school teacher, because that's a challenging job and we love that you do it. And second, that you have the awareness to ask about these types of questions. So the more detailed teachers can be in documenting what they see, the more benefit there is to the student in terms of passing that information on and making sure that that's getting to the right people and making sure that the right eyes are being put on things in the right ways so that ultimately the supports can be appropriately planned for that student. And certainly you want to work in coordination with the student's parent on that process and make sure that you've involved the parent in that and that they're looking at history. We know from all of this information that a student's history, a student's family history is an important consideration in that process. So use what we know about the science of reading and the science of dyslexia to kind of guide your observations and feed that referral information forward and ultimately be a good advocate for that student. And so that process will unfold in different ways in different places. By July, it will be a similar process for everybody across the state. But at this point, it may be looking at a different process for that referral, whether that school is fully embraced in the MTSS model or whether they're getting there by July. So it may look differently. I will say that within the federal and the state guidelines, there is no standalone category for dyslexia at this point. It comes underneath the rubric of specific learning disability. And so the boxes that are available to check may not include dyslexia as a standalone, but that information can be added to all of the information. So the eligibility category may be specific learning disability, but within the documentation and within the intervention planning, people should be addressing the fact that this is a child who is showing, a profile of dyslexia, and that's where the intervention needs to be. So it may not come as an independent box check, but should come as, there should be a way to document that and to make everybody aware of that. My suspicion is, with this question, that perhaps there also needs to be a lot of education amongst fellow educators and making sure that everybody has appropriate information on what is dyslexia, what can we do about dyslexia, and some of the potential resources for that. The Exceptional Children's website, you can look under resources at the top and then click down to LD, and then there's a whole segment on policy, programs, laws around dyslexia. And so this teacher would also want to keep the education going forward on this whole process. So, does that answer all of those?
Great, thanks. Okay, Laura, you're up. Do you have suggestions on where to start with finding resources for a child's school to help identify the dyslexia and to teach a dyslexic student?
I can't stress the importance enough of the power of a passionate parent. Parents have more power, in my opinion, than often the teacher does in the classroom. I'm both. I'm a 4th grade regular education teacher and also the parent of a dyslexic at my school. And I have found that what a parent asks for, a parent is typically given. So my encouragement, if you're a parent of a dyslexic reader, I would encourage you to ask the classroom teacher if he or she is willing to learn more about dyslexia. And if they're willing, then you can gently start sharing information. One piece that could be shared easily with the whole school staff is on the Department of Instructional website, DPI. There are several very brief videos between 5 to 7 minutes. You could gently ask the school administrator if you could come to the next staff meeting. I recommend bringing chocolate. And you could show the video. You could easily pass out some basic pieces of information. There's pieces in your folder that we gave you today that educate people as a beginning. I would encourage you to speak with other parents. I have found that when parents join together, they are able to accomplish quite a bit. The ECAC, this is in your folder, is a wonderful resource. If you don't know who to turn to, you simply call them on the phone and tell them your story, and they are there to help you.
Thank you. So the next question is going to be a team effort between Kim and Jeanette. What advice do you have for parents to encourage the schools to better educate their teachers and get training for dyslexia when budgets are tight?
For advice for parents, correct?
Yes. What advice do you have for parents?
My experience has been I usually try to find at least one staff member to help be an advocate for you and your child, because you can usually get to one person versus like a whole team for your child. And I think it's just a slow grind. You have to keep asking questions. My boys are both older and have excelled, but one especially still needs support. And it's, sometimes it's a weekly thing depending on that year and that teacher. But I'll ask the teacher, the year before to say, can you tell them what you learned or what worked best for my child, or what didn't work? Because sometimes it's about what doesn't work versus what is working. So that's kind of my advice.
Hi. When you're dealing with the budget of a school, the money is the money. If they don't have it, they don't have it. But one thing I learned as once a PTA president, it's something that is not utilized enough. So going to your PTA, getting involved with your school, talking to them, they are required to give out budgets. And you take the time, you look at the budget, you see where the money is, where they have funding, and you talk to your principal, you talk to the PTA president, you talk to the PTA board at your school about providing training, how much, you know, the school that I was the president, they had a large budget. We had lots of fundraisers. I mean, we had, I will say, we had almost $30,000. There are some that have more in their budget yearly. So taking $2,500 out, talking to your president, getting involved and saying, hey, we would like to have some of this money allocated to train a teacher in Orton or to provide an awareness event for the school. So getting involved and using your PTSA, talking to your principal, because even with the PTSA, they have money allocated for the principal to use. So encourage your principal, your teachers, your other parents, if you're not able to be there, to get involved as well, so that, you know, money is being spent the way it needs to be spent for our children.
So may I add one thing? So the next is for Nancy.
Oh, she wanted to add.
Oh, yes, you can. Thank you.
So 2 things I did last year as a parent, I put it in writing to our Board of Education that I was requesting the Director of Exceptional Children's in my school district to contact the Exceptional Children's Division at DPI and request free dyslexia training in our school system. And it happened. It happened last year. And in addition to that, there is through the NCIDA, the School Improvement Project, I believe it is, there's a wonderful 5-day training for teachers, reading research to classroom practice. Some of you are shaking your heads. Yes. I highly recommend that you ask specifically for that and you follow up.
What's it called?
Reading research to classroom practice.
It used to be Reading Foundation.
Yes, it's the old name Reading Foundations. The person that came to our school was named Christy Kamada, and we trained about 30 teachers last year, and they're continuing the training this year. It's a small step, but it's a step in the right direction.
I'm passing down to Nancy. Are you ready, Nancy?
I'm ready.
All right. What do you see as the most important first step in getting all North Carolina public schools to provide appropriate instruction with students with dyslexia? That's
And you want to be superintendent? No.
Right. And then things like screening, teacher training, awareness.
Well, I think that our greatest asset in public schools is our teachers. And I think that our teachers deserve high quality training. And that goes back to their pre-service training. And so when we, you know, if I could wave my magic wand, we have magic wands apparently in Western North Carolina. If I could wave a magic wand, I would have training in the university systems that was based on good, solid science. Unfortunately, that's just not true. So I think that the place to start is with teacher training, because if the more knowledge teachers have, the better they're able to identify the students that need to be screened, and then the better equipped they are to look at the results of that screening and adapt the instruction to best serve those students. Now, how to make that happen, I wish I had the answer.
Right.
But I think the best place to start is with good teacher instruction.
Thank you. And the next question goes to Leo and Jacob. How do you advocate for yourself? There you go.
Well, it's really hard to advocate for yourself on top of just regular school stuff. I'm still learning how to advocate for myself. I think the best way to do that is tell your teachers initially that you have dyslexia, and then if you have any ideas about things that can help you, letting them know and helping them understand that you're not like every other student.
Yeah, Just letting your teachers know that I kind of let my teachers know that I might need more time with something. That's a big thing I do, is just like let them know that I take longer or prefer to type things over like handwrite stuff, so that's a big thing.
Thank you. The next one is to Deidre. What guidance do you have for elementary school age bilingual students in dual language programs that have been recently identified with dyslexia? Should they remain in a dual language program or move to a more traditional program?
So it's difficult to tell on this one because there are lots of different bilingual programs. Some are coming in to teach English to non-native English speakers. So remaining in that program is critical in terms of being integrated into an educational program and into society. So if that's the direction of that, we know that English, the ELL kids need that instruction. We also want them to have strong home language modeling in their native language, because the language that parents will provide for a student in a home environment is going to be strongest in their native language. So we don't want to say only speak to your child in English. So there are different considerations if it is an ELL type of program versus an immersion program where we're teaching a native English speaker a second language. We know that one of the fundamental issues with dyslexia is in that phonological processing and phonological knowledge. And so there are lots of different considerations. I would love to see immersion programs do a preliminary screening on phonological awareness and rapid naming to look at some of those risk factors before kiddos go in, because they're entering into these programs in kindergarten and sometimes making a 3-year commitment to that program to be involved in that. So it gets really tricky. It gets tricky for schools because you can't just, okay, you went out, let's pull somebody else in. There are lots of different considerations for kids and families in that process. And it depends sometimes on what is the background of the educators. So if you have extremely talented teachers who are well versed in learning disabilities and learning differences, that may be able to work out. Oftentimes the teacher in an immersion program is a great language teacher for that second language and is doing a phenomenal job in that, but does not necessarily have the exceptional children's background in terms of supporting that child in other ways. And so I tried to kind of look up some of the research on this, and it's a little bit mixed, but people come out strong, stronger on the side of that child needs to be in a traditional program because they need the consistency of the language exposure and the sounds and the structure of language, because we know that's already weak with a dyslexic profile. That said, you have to know where that child's going, and so the timing of that and how you handle that becomes a consideration. Susan Barton comes out with an emphatic no. The Shawitzes are pretty strong in their thinking that sign language needs to be the second language for students with dyslexia, and so there are different ways of thinking about second language study. I have also seen lots of kids with dyslexia who are good in the second language, so you don't want to remove that altogether, but if it is a very young child with a new diagnosis, we really have to consider their comprehensive support needs and maybe adding a second language on somewhere down the line, but giving them the intervention time and the language structure and the language modeling that they need as consistently and as intensely as we can. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
There are a few resources for that. There's a Center for Advanced Research on Language Acquisition out of the University of Minnesota. And a lot of the research looks at French and English, and it's coming out of Canada with looking at how they're doing their programs. But there are some models to look at out there, but in general, it's probably best to stay in a traditional classroom or to transition back to that. I did have one young student, and it was just super stressful for this little girl, and her phonological awareness was extremely weak. And so they needed to make an immediate change for her, but it may depend on the child and the programs.
Thank you. If you'll pass that down to Kim B.
Okay.
As a parent of a dyslexic child, what are 3 pieces of advice you would give to another parent of a dyslexic child?
Okay. I
It
think
doesn't have to be 3.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Because there's a lot. I think the one thing is that we have always been honest with our kids about that they learn differently. There's nothing wrong with them. Everybody learns, it has a different style. So we were never like, we're not going to tell them what's wrong with them. So people call me a lot in Raleigh and say, what should you do? I think the second thing is intervention and intervention early. And I think we were fortunate to have the resources. My boys attended the Hill Center. Ms. Shore was one of my kids' teachers, and she did a great job. But they were identified really early, and because I had one son that had it when my younger son started to exhibit certain things. I would say the other thing is, like, I read so much. Like, now that they're adolescents, there's a whole nother group of problems. But I think just there's always new things, and I think there's new technology, like Chromebooks rock if you have kids in high school. There's so much available. My sons have gone to schools that teachers have, I think open to learning is like, I think if you can encourage your kids, there are so many different ways to learn, where it's audiobooks or just talking to people or dictating your papers, or there's so much technology out there. Like Owen is so much better than I am. But I think that's like, be open to learning, be honest with your kids, and try to, it's gonna be okay, I think. I think every day we're just like, we're gonna take it one day at a time, because some teachers, some years have been better than others. I mean, I'm not gonna say it's been great all the time, but I think you know that they are able to do great things, and so they can't do everything great. I don't do everything great. So we're really open and honest. So I think that's the best way.
Good.
Yeah.
I'd just like to add on to what Kim said about the honesty. And at Shelton, we don't call it a learning disability. We call it a learning difference. And I was very adamant about that with my kids, that they were not disabled. They had a learning difference. Their brain worked differently. And I feel very strongly that that difference is pretty important, because somebody's brain needs to work in a different way, or we're never going to fix any of our problems. And I think that, and I heard, Maggie is now a professor, and I heard her counseling a student on the phone, and she said, you need to realize that you do not have a disability. Your brain works differently. And I was like, oh yeah, she's spreading it along. But I think that's an important point to make with students.
I wanted to say something too, to add it. It's going to be short. Another thing that I would let a parent know is that it is hard. There are going to be those hard days. There are going to be those stressful days. One thing we don't want is our children to hurt. We don't want them in pain. We don't want them to struggle. But sometimes those little struggles will help build them up and help them learn that they do learn differently, and what they need to do to make sure that everyone understands that I learn differently, this is what I need. But without some of those little struggles, now I don't mean the ones that just kind of makes them want to go under the bed and not come out, but just their little things where they may not do as well on a test. So instead of removing the test, we talk about, with my son, we talk about what could we have done differently? How could we have handled this differently? And we implement that with his ideas, and we go back, and so when he succeeds, he's like, wow, I did it. This is what I did. So it's hard to allow your child, well, not really allow, but for them to have to struggle a little bit. But we have to also realize that on the other side of that struggle, we're building muscle, we're building who they're going to be later in life.
So our next questions go to Leo and Jacob. What has been helpful to you in school?
Like Kim said, the Chromebooks is a big thing at my high school, so that's something that I have, like, that's really helped me. Instead of having to write everything by hand, just typing up a paper, and that's something that's really helpful for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think extended time has helped me, just because then I can actually get my thoughts down without having to rush through everything. Having teachers who actually understand what dyslexia is really helpful, because I've had a teacher who just doesn't believe that it exists, and that's been hard. Complementing my learning with like YouTube videos or things like that to draw extra connections. Friends who are nice and don't judge is also a good thing. And I think taking English at Hill has also been extra help. So.
Great, thank you. Laura, next question goes to you. How can I best work with my child's teacher?
I'm going to keep going on the technology theme just to start here. I learned last year as a parent that I could, maybe you all know this, but I didn't. You can request an assistive technology evaluation for very specific items that can be added to the Chromebook and what works best with your learners. So for me, that was a key piece on that in 4th grade. You know, we have something available to you. If you use your handout that was given about items for further study, it's a participant guide. There's a document called What Every Teacher Should Know. You'll have to go to the website and you can click the document. It's a simple, well-written piece of paper that can help the classroom teacher understand the basics. There's also one for families, the handbook for families, that will guide you as well. I think as a parent, and I don't always do this so well, you gently need to come alongside your child's teacher and start with one teacher at a time and just do your best. You can encourage them. I've even offered to do this for the teacher to get a scholarship through IDA. We offer teacher training scholarships every year. We just sent we're sending several people to the national conference, so that's one thing a parent can do. I'm going to piggyback on Jeanette. Also, your PTO. Our PTO emails the teachers and asks, what would you like us to do with all the money from the carnival? So that's a time a parent could come in and say, well, I'd like to tell you about structured literacy. And I'm serious. You can offer ideas. You know what works. If you don't know what works, get on the IDA website and click on the Parents tab. There is a wealth of information. Reading, reading, reading.
Thank you. The next question goes to Nancy. Can you describe for us some effective approaches for teaching students with dyslexia?
You know, I don't really have to, because in your handouts, there's a wonderful description of structured literacy, and there's so much support of that. I loved it in Dr. Odegaard's presentation. He did DISC, direct, intensive, cumulative, structured and cumulative. Yeah, structured and cumulative. Yeah, and so that's really the best descriptor. So I think the best use of our time would be for you really to go to that handout that's in the packet. The packet that you all were given has rich resources in it, and there is a very good description. It's also on the for those of you at home, it's in that list of resources that was in the link. So that's and it has graphics that show how they all work together. So I think that that's really the best resource.
Thank you. Deidre, how does dyslexia impact expressive response to questions?
That is a super question. We know that dyslexia is a language-based learning disability. And so it can fall along the continuum of how much of that it has an impact on oral language, how much of that has an impact on written language. We know that there are some individuals for whom the oral component, with the exception of the phonological awareness, does not seem to have as big of an impact as the written language. That said, we can see a lot of variation, and it's critically important to consider language functioning in kids when we're thinking about what is their print-based learning difference in reading and writing. And so the types of things that we may see is that early history of, oftentimes kids will have been in speech language intervention when they were during the preschool period, where there are issues with language development, speech articulation, vocabulary, how they're putting together their thoughts. Their thinking and reasoning is great, but putting words behind it and getting that out in a fluent way can be difficult for kids. So the expressive part, oftentimes, we'll see that lag. They need more time for processing, to retrieve the information, to organize the information, and to get it back out. So it's that ease of expression. It can impact receptive language if information is coming in too fast or in too complex of a form. And we know, from the exposure, and I think that the slide that Nancy had shown us earlier, the exposure to vocabulary can vary and the exposure to background information can vary, and all of that then goes into language functioning. So Virginia Berninger looks at what's called oral and written language, or OWL. And so whenever we're thinking about a print-based learning difference, we should also be looking into an oral language learning difference. And if there are concerns in those areas, to tap upon the resources of our friends in the speech and language field, because we can't do it all, and sometimes kids need in-depth language support as well as they do for the print-based language support. So,
thank you. And who has that to Laura? And several of you may want to weigh in on this one. Should regular ed teachers be required to receive awareness on dyslexia?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Are we, as a regular ed teacher, are we given that training? Unfortunately, no, not always. In some cases, yes. So what I did on my own is I went and sought training. I actually had a family offer to send me to training and to pay for it. I know not all families can do that, but that was one way on my own that I was able to learn. There, you can learn so much by reading. Start reading. I started with Overcoming Dyslexia by Sally Shaywitz. You buy it used on Amazon if you need to. Spend $10 and learn.
Well, it looked like the panel agreed with you.
I do have a couple of other thoughts too, and then I'll pass to you. When you're looking at the resources for further study, there's a calendar for October that has a link just about for every single day of the month. It's quick. They're short little things. You could gently ask your regular education teacher if they were interested in wanting to learn, and if they say yes, then say, well, great, I've got this calendar I'd love to share with you this month. It's an easy tool. If they say no, then you know that door's closed. You're going to come another way later on, and maybe not this month. Another thing that you can ask the regular education teacher is, would you be willing to hear what has been successful for my child in the past? I've been with my child their whole life. Are you willing to hear what has worked? Hopefully, I hope most teachers would answer yes to that question. And there is a grant available. As a parent, I offered this to my public school system for Learning Allies. For public schools, they can get that at no cost. Just search online. You just have to be resourceful and creative and persistent. Don't give up. One day, should all regular ed teachers be trained? Of course. I'm sorry it's not today. If it were up to me, it would be.
I just wanted to add that I think it should be a requirement, but I also think there should be incentives for teachers that get the extra training, because as we know that teachers aren't paid what they should be, but just like any business or any other corporation that offer incentives to their employees, teachers should receive incentives for coming out of pocket, paying for this extra training and going the extra mile.
Keep that right for a second. I'm going to pose this question to you, but I'd also like to get feedback from Ken and Leo and Jacob on this. High school graduates with dyslexia, what's next for them? And one of the questions with this is, do you tell your employer that you have dyslexia?
The employer, I think it's up to the individual and the type of job, but because with dyslexia, I've had issues where I've made some mistakes that I should not have made. And being able to, for someone to understand why you're making the mistakes you're making is important for them to know. So I think that's that's something that's personal if you decide that you want to talk to your employer about it. I think it's important to do, but I also know that it could get a little sketchy, unfortunately. But I think it's important for everyone to know if you have those struggles. But as far as high school, I have a 10th grader who is dyslexic. He was identified when he was in the 2nd grade. We started preparing for college at that point. We started teaching him how to self-advocate from 2nd grade. Each year, we kind of added a little extra to what we decided he needed to be able to do to be successful in high school as well as in college. When it's time for college, students, parents, unfortunately, you don't get to have much of a say once they step out and they go to college. You're not spoken to. You don't get to ask for accommodations. You don't get to fight for your child the way you're doing it now. So you have to teach your child how to self-advocate. It starts early. The earlier you start, the more comfortable they become with it. We started around 4th, 5th grade with my son, where he had to self-advocate at home. He had his accommodations. We explained to him why he needed it. He understands why now. He understands his learning style. He uses YouTube videos. He uses audio books, all of those things like that. So now he can go to his teacher and communicate to his teacher, this is what I need it in this format. So those are things that can help your child become successful in college. A lot of, when it comes to taking those SATs and ACTs, we applied for accommodations in 9th grade. Actually, his EC teacher came to us. If you haven't done that, go to your EC teacher, talk to them about the accommodations that they need for the ACT and the SAT. You would be surprised at what they offer, including extra time means 2-3 days so to take the tests. So college is possible. Some may say you won't get the help, but from my experience in the research, it's actually a little easier in college than it is in high school because you're not overwhelmed with classes and tests and things like that. So.
I mean, I agree with everything that you said. I do think that there's tons of learning support at college, has been my experience. I've actually attended several things at UNC, the Burnett seminars that they do every year. There's tons of kids with ADD and organizational problems, and some kids don't even realize they need the help to college, until college. My boys they have learned to self-advocate. They need reminders. Even my kid that doesn't have dyslexia needs reminders. So we try to just make it the norm. And I think there's a college for everybody. And I'll brag on my middle son. He really wants to go to the Naval Academy. He has dyslexia. He's a straight A student. He worked so hard, but he would have never had that much determination if he'll tell you if he didn't have dyslexia. So.
I can't really speak about the college aspect, but over the summer I got a job working at Chick-fil-A. I did not tell them I had dyslexia. I was mostly the kids that was outside taking orders. And the hardest part of that job was probably names, writing down names and getting, spelling was just, oh my God. And also multitasking, being inside on the headset, making drinks and taking orders was nearly impossible. I don't think I'm going to tell my employer yet, but mainly because it hasn't mattered that much, but yeah, I think it's kind of up to you.
And we get through that with humor a lot too.
Right.
I think my boys have learned to laugh at themselves, like about how they spell names or if they can't remember something. That helps. You laugh.
And
You should.
I don't have much to say.
That's,
so, yeah.
that's fine. I've got another question for you.
Hold on, they're almost done. They're almost done.
Jacob, and this will be our last question between Jacob and Leo. How would you describe dyslexia to someone who is unfamiliar with it?
A lot of my teachers probably don't know much about it, and definitely other students. Like, it's hard to, I don't let many of my friends know that I have it because a lot of them don't understand what it is. So but to my teachers, I usually just kind of tell them that I may need longer, like, time extension on stuff, or to, like, the whole typing thing instead of handwriting. So that's just my big thing.
Yeah, I think it's hard to explain what dyslexia is to a non-dyslexic person because it's like explaining colors to a blind person. You can't. I think the best metaphor that I've learned has been using a sewing machine. Most of you guys would use a sewing machine and it'd be fluent, easy, and you don't really have to think about it that much, but we have to sew by hand and think about every stitch, so it takes a lot more effort. But that's kind of, other than that, it's really hard to explain. I mean, you can get into the brain process, but even then people don't really understand, and it's really hard to articulate.
Thank you. Thank you, panel. My role as moderator is over.
I didn't mean to get up. Stay there for a picture.
Stay there, stay there. Don't move.
Okay, so we're going to take a 15-minute break, so we'll come back at 11:15. Don't forget the raffles or the donations that the scholarship Also, Donna Gargett, who's our next keynote speaker, has art from Blank Canvas Art set up in the atrium. The resource fair, we also, if you're interested in joining the IDA, we would love to have you. So this is a great time for you to join the IDA. We have a laptop set up if you want to join online today, or we also have paper copies of the membership application there. So take advantage of this 15 minutes to network with other like-minded, passionate people that are here today and visit the other resources and events that we have. So we'll see you back at 11:15.
Some of you handed me questions. I'm going to give them to the participants on the panel, so if you want to come up and ask them later.
Well, we're going to actually do written responses to those questions.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. I would like to introduce our next keynote speaker, Donna Gargett, who will be speaking on getting to the heart of the matter. Donna Gargett holds a bachelor's degree in psychology and has worked in the human services field since 2002. Donna was also a private day school director and led her staff through an accreditation process. With teamwork and collaboration, she turned a struggling school into a thriving campus. She holds a qualified professional credential in mental health and substance abuse. She is a licensing coordinator for Touchstone Residential Services, a private foster care service where she trains people to become foster parents. Donna is a proud dyslexic herself and has 2 daughters. Her oldest, Bella, age 9, was diagnosed with anxiety and dyslexia, while Ava, age 8, was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia. They are the true heart and soul of what she does. Because of them, she started on a path of advocating in the dyslexia movement. In 2016, she accepted a position as a state leader for decoding dyslexia, and I'm thrilled to see that we have many members of that group here today. She has shared her personal story in the state capitol to help push legislation forward. She realized that she was needed in North Carolina to provide resources for students with learning disabilities. The title artist came much later in life. As a self-taught artist, she sold her first painting at age 26. She took her love for art and advocating and meshed them into a nonprofit. She answered that call by founding the nonprofit Blank Canvas Art, and much of that art is displayed in the atrium today. Both Decoding Dyslexia in North Carolina and Blank Canvas Awareness Art provide resources for those with learning disabilities such as dyslexia. The United Way recently provided her with an award for her volunteerism in Onslow County. She was the 2018 recipient of Golden Rule Lightkeeper Award, first place in the education category, and continuously recognized for her outstanding community service. And just recently, she also tackled politics and ran for school board in 2018. And just recently, Donna was a finalist for the Wilma Women to Watch Awards. This year, there were more than 200 nominations, and there were 35 finalists that were hand-selected, and Donna is one of the talented finalists. Her background in mental health, volunteerism, management, advocacy, and literacy education sets her apart. And we welcome Donna. I'm thrilled that she's here today to share her story.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. This is my magic wand. Is it gonna go?
The right button on the wand.
Oh, yeah.
Not so magic.
Uh-oh.
It'll become magic. One moment, please.
So as he's getting that together, what's going to happen is there's just going to be a series of slides to get a feel of what the nonprofit's about. So you're going to see a lot of artwork. Some of the artwork is here today, and There we go. All right, so my name is Donna Gargett, and I am a proud dyslexic, but it's taken me 40 years to really say that with confidence. I'm really not one for titles, but if I had to sum myself up in a couple, I would say I'm a wife, mother, artist, entrepreneur, caseworker, mental health professional, advocate, and let's throw in magician. I like to think of myself as well-rounded. Did I stump you with magician? Well, I discovered that I really am quite illiterate, but with the sleight of hand, I've been making people think that I've been reading for years. I'm a great paraphraser, thesaurus, and people person. I could make myself disappear in the conference room or classroom, and that is how I survived. Because of my struggles with dyslexia, I had to achieve my goals through very different means. I became an entrepreneur at age 16 because I couldn't hold a job. I didn't go to Harvard, but I think success is measured by obtaining our goals, and my goal, quite literally, was just getting into college. College was just assumed, the next step. I did squeeze my way into college. After 4 different majors and the process of elimination, I graduated with a degree in psychology. I went on to different jobs, directing children's programs, working in mental health, and working with a variety of individuals, including the homeless. I have worked mainly for nonprofits because I enjoy being overworked and underpaid, much like teachers. But in all seriousness, I enjoy meaningful work. These experiences are priceless, and I have used the world as my classroom. Today, I train people to become foster parents and provide one of the coaches and lead workshops using evidence-based practices. Both my young daughters are dyslexic, and I knew the road that they were going to go down because I dragged my feet down the same path. I decided that my professional job had prepared me to advocate for their needs. I was struggling to find resources for my daughters, so I started the nonprofit Blank Canvas Awareness Art. Its name itself, Blank Canvas, is about the endless possibilities for our children to create opportunities to help them explore. The lower school students here at the Hill Learning Center participated in an art project led by myself and the amazing staff. We left the room, made it look like a giant party. But what we did is I asked the students to help explain what dyslexia was and a little bit about their strengths. Many students decided to represent their strengths in sports, art, music. Other students represented the challenges of dyslexia through awareness ribbons and symbols. So for those of you today, see if you can find the maze in the display. This piece is a great representation that highlights the dyslexic journey of a student finding their path through a maze of learning. During the project, I discussed how one piece of art looks good, but when we put it together, it becomes this amazing stained glass representation. We celebrate everyone's difference and our similarities in this project. The goal of the project was actually not the artwork, but rather the message and the stories it tells. Art is a great way to see into the soul. So for parents that had children that participated in this project, I hope that you take a moment to ask your child or student about the artwork and use some of the language like, tell me about your artwork, not what is that? There's an amazing story behind each one, and there is insight into their self-esteem and struggle. Artwork is self-discovery, and every artist paints what he is. Today, I highlight the art that we provide for our organization. We use a lot of different angles when we tackle dyslexia: tutoring, advocating, educating, and it's become a positive platform when we talk about it with different groups of organizations. And you'll see a lot of those images here. I realized that Blank Canvas Awareness Art was not fully addressing the psychological side to dyslexia in addressing anxiety and depression. So one of my solutions was addressing that need through Reset Life Consultant. And I am now able to support parents and children in their emotional journey by providing strategies to help both. It has been amazing to help students and parents through one-on-one coaching and bridging the gaps and leading workshops for parents and children. Oh, okay, we're not there yet. But I'm not here to talk about my nonprofit or my business. I'm here to tell my story. And like any great story, it really is to talk about your hometown to get to the heart of the matter. I grew up in a very strict Catholic Italian family in the suburbs of California. I am one of the original Valley girls, and I am the youngest of two very accomplished brothers. My parents designated an award wall in our house, and my brothers filled it with varsity letters and valedictorian awards, and mine was silly pictures and stories that no one could make out. My earliest school memory is cheating off my best friend on an alphabet test in kindergarten. That friend carried me through, and we're still friends today. In fact, she helped edit my website. Growing up, I frustrated my teachers to no end, and I hit my academic wall in second grade. While I loved my second grade teacher, Miss Rose, I didn't like the fact that I had to take summer school while my brothers were off playing, or the fact that she suggested 20 minutes of reading, because my mom made sure that I completed that 20 minutes, and that felt like torture as I blankly stared at the pages. Every year, the whispers from my parent-teacher conference got louder until they were finally ringing in my ears. I learned to hide in the classroom and to blend into the desk out of fear of being called on. I was drowning and desperately needed a life vest, something to help me want to wake up and to go to school. I tried drill train, but found it to be very difficult with the choreographed routines because of my directional confusion. I found out that anyone could join the track team. No test, I was in. First, they had me doing long jump, and I was pretty average. But in practice, they had us completing drills, and they noticed that I had great stamina. It's then when I became a long-distance runner. I was finding my place and getting a sense of belonging. After the years of trauma in school, I finally found a way to meet my greatest need, belonging. I ran track and cross country in high school and wanted to continue in college. College was just assumed in my family, so I squeaked through my SATs and found myself having to take the dreaded math packets. That squeak was a blowhorn to the college system that I didn't understand my math facts. I started college at the very bottom and had to climb my Mount Everest. After inquiring about the track and cross country team, I learned I was not eligible because of my remedial classes. So not only was I starting college, but I was losing my sense of belonging. I identified with being a runner. I wasn't necessarily fast, but I was the hardest working. I told my college coach that if I couldn't compete, I still wanted to be able to train, and he said he would allow that. Since I was training anyway, I decided I would tackle the ultimate run, a marathon. So I told the running club coach that I was going to do that, and he suggested that I shouldn't tackle something so big my first year of college. Well, that just gave me more motivation to succeed. I ran twice a day and put more miles on my shoes than my car. A week before the marathon, I was walking to class and experienced what I thought was a pulled muscle. It was so extreme that I got to class and I was literally in tears. I stopped training thinking maybe I had pulled a muscle or just overdid it. But I was determined to run the marathon. I completed my first marathon and limped to the finish line with a time of 5 hours and 20 minutes. Pretty average, but my story is anything but average. I didn't tell my mom of the pain the week before out of fear that she wouldn't let me run. Afterwards, we went to the doctor to find I had a stress fracture in my pelvic bone. It was already healing, and the doctor confirmed that I had run the 26.2 miles with a stress fracture. I will never forget how the doctor looked at me with such amazement that I had pushed my body to the limit. It was the same look I got from the college psychologist when she confirmed that I was dyslexic. She couldn't believe I had made it to college without any specialized help or accommodations. I remember just crying in relief to know I wasn't stupid, and finally there was this name for this thing that slowed me down. One might say that my marathon and my years of schooling showed great grit. It's easy for typical learners to talk about overcoming challenges, but for a dyslexic individual, it comes from a place of pain. It doesn't feel like a celebration, but survival. To me, grit is being able to realize that failure does not define you. After seeing dyslexia from all angles, I can say grit is not easy and should not be a word we throw around like gift or celebration. It takes balance, our challenges with strengths, and that is truly getting to the heart of the matter. As I helped initiate 2 after-school specialized clubs for students with dyslexia, these clubs provide a balance. Parents are able to see the importance of not just providing the resources and the specialized help, but also the camaraderie of working alongside someone that has the same struggles. As youth, we don't want to feel different and fight so hard to fit in, and belonging is so important. I recently saw this quote, "Mountains don't rise without earthquakes," and I wanted to share this painting with you. Not that one, that one. As you can see, it's very specific to dyslexia. I think it's a clear message about the anxiety and the knot you feel when faced with dyslexia. I know as a child I felt sick every time the teacher decided to do the round-robin reading. But I want you to notice I didn't paint a child standing at the typical 3rd grade wall. With so much emphasis on children with dyslexia, I think most people think adults outgrow it. Yes, dyslexia can be remediated, but not every adult has had the opportunity, especially if they were not properly diagnosed. I actually sketched this painting at work. Work had become a toxic place where I was filled with emotions of digesting my daughter's diagnosis, as well as learning to teach trainings, compile reports, and mask my dyslexia through it all. There was no pulling the rabbit out of the hat at this job. The administrative assistant took advantage of my personal advocating and admitted to purposely making me read out loud for trainings. This individual was eventually fired after the police officer had gathered evidence that my credit card had been taken. But what felt more criminal was the use of my disability. It made me sick. In this painting, that is me as an adult stuck at this wall. Instead of feeling sick at school, I often feel sick at work. Still being tested at work on skills and turning in reports, even work within my nonprofit where you would think people would be more understanding for my dyslexic mistakes. People still go to town with their red pen in a not so friendly way. Dyslexia isn't about being right or wrong. It isn't even just about reading. It's not an exact baking recipe. Letters and numbers are foreign. It's a pinch of this and that, and finding access and full potential. About 2 years ago, I finally advocated for myself at work. With my current job, I had to basically paint a picture of a home that I'm licensing in a 16-page report. When I started, I got the 16-page form and literally cried when I saw it didn't have spell check. It wasn't a simple cut and paste solution. And I spelled the wrong every time I typed, so I knew this was going to be a disaster. I, of course, explained to my boss that I would have some spelling errors because of my dyslexia, and she said she would help correct them. My paper was given back to me with red ink all over it. It was a nightmare, trying to go back and forth and correct everything. I'm sure not I'm not sure anyone has truly asked me if I needed anything. And so when she did, I really teared up and said, I need spell check. She said that if I wrote a letter that she would get it to the right person. And she did. In a few weeks, I got an email from the state with the attachment of a spell check version. It felt victorious. It didn't fix all my problems, but a huge chunk of embarrassing ones. The first time I ever advocated for myself, I was 40. And now, after that personal hurdle, I get to help others. This is why our growing technology is so important. And I hope for those of you near a Microsoft store that you take advantage of the free workshops that they have, and that you can learn the technology that has been devised especially for our dyslexic community. Over the last couple years, I've connected with many adult dyslexics, and every single one of them use terms like, I felt stupid. Some even share stories of self-defeating behavior, alcoholism, family members that have taken their lives. This isn't a learning difference that just gets words mixed up. It's much more than that. We hear phrases like invisible in times of trauma. And the one thing that we need to do is to see the quiet kid in the back of the classroom as well as we see the class clown. I bet you they are both hurting inside. And as you see through not just my story but my artwork, art is healing. But we are teaching the creativity right out of our kids. And for those with dyslexia or other learning differences, that is our strength. I recently listened to a story about a man's 4-year-old son. He was performing the nativity scene. He really was excited about the boys performing, but they messed up the order. It was a scene where the wise man brings baby Jesus gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So the one boy leaned down and said, I have gold for baby Jesus. And the next boy said, I have myrrh. And the last said, Frank sent this. And of course the crowd laughed, much like you, because it's entertaining, and that's what performance is about. Not the mistake, not the fact that most likely the child had some sort of auditory processing issue. Our mistakes are funny, and if we use that wit, we will go on to find our creative path. But did anyone ask how that mistake was perceived to the child? Did the child think he failed? No real success story can be told without great failure, and failure in dyslexia is an everyday occurrence. If we know we can't learn without failure, then why do we punish our children when they fail? But also the reaction to the mistakes are important. There is still another painting to be painted, and that is me standing on top of these bricks, because today I've made peace with my school years, because I know that my experience can help change these daunting years into a great learning environment. But that is only when we come together with empathy, understanding, and willingness to do things just a little different. So first, let's dive into understanding. The first time I heard the definition, the IDA definition of dyslexia, I thought there'd be a little bit more. Don't get me wrong, I'm not arguing with the definition at an IDA event. But to me, dyslexia is a betrayal of words, numbers, directions, sometimes coordination. Dyslexia causes frustration due to repeat failure, internal pain, and self-doubt, leading to low self-esteem. Dyslexia is another diverse dimension of thought, and when we place value in these differences, dyslexia brings a great perspective to art, science, and technology. Without a proper definition or label, we get lost into this category that seems to not affect the overall livelihood of our students. To me, the label of dyslexia is a positive one that is an instructional manual for our educators. And I hope many of you are starting to see the importance of early detection and proper remediation. This photo behind me was designed with photographer Peter Roulon and myself. It's an ode to Andy Warhol, who happens to be dyslexic. I've always loved the simplicity and vibrant colors of his work. And I like props, and I often use this self-esteem jar in my trainings to foster parents. I wanted to create something that would be a reminder to us that every child needs help in reaching their full potential. We need to suggest different avenues so children can find their strengths. My mom did that for me when I was fired from my first 2 jobs. I was fired because I couldn't manage the money or take the to-go orders right. She knew my self-esteem jar was completely empty, and she took the crafts that I made, like padded photo albums and hair clips, and we sold them. This was no lemonade stand. This was a full-blown business with business license, business cards, and enough money to pay my way to college. I struggled to make multiple cards, and I remember just crying that I had put it together backwards. And my dad said, you know, you can fix your own mistakes. You know you are talented when you can fix your own mistakes. And I did, and that's how I've tackled life. It's taught me a lot of great skills that no first job could teach me. But I'm not sure I would have found it on my own. I had parents to point out my strengths and to find my self-esteem jar. I wanted to, that was my business, Made with Love. I also wanted to talk to you guys today about strengths and needs. And in this slide, we have the idea of tackling needs, but also the expression, and then with the proper intervention, we're able to tackle those needs. So when we don't have the proper interventions, our children don't get to that relaxation phase. And most of the time we're concentrating on what's happening in that expression and the behavior. But really to get to the heart of the matter is to look at what is the need of the child. Because I'm running out of time, this is actually some artwork from an artist in Denver, in Colorado, and I do have this piece with me today. She's also an adult dyslexic artist, writer, and this is her piece titled Advocate. Again, talking about the different ways that we have to advocate for our children. She depicts both the educational discrimination and trauma in her advocating for her dyslexic child and future grandchildren. And she was a big part of this presentation because we actually co-presented at an IDA event. So I wanted to share this piece with you also. And so over the years, I've met a lot of amazing adult artists. Another one that comes to mind is Chad Starling, and he donated a piece. I don't have his piece on my slideshow, but I did want to mention him because his artwork is very different. What he does is he uses a word and repeats the word to make a 3-dimensional design. And so when I met him and he shared with me that he was dyslexic, I asked him, what does he do when he makes a mistake? Because it's an art form where you're using words. And he said, well, I just keep going. And I thought, that's right, we just keep going. And it's a great reminder to myself and my organization. And he had donated a piece called Limitless. And so I'd like to leave that positive message of hope and inspiration regarding that as well. But my goal today was to share my authentic self and to truly show you obstacles that a dyslexic individual has to overcome and to show you the impact you have on your young students' life is life-changing. There's the maze. Many of you hold the key to not just knowledge, but the ladder to fill the self-esteem jar. Be the person that asks the student what they need and see their strengths take flight. I know you will help them reach their full potential. My dyslexic journey has been incredible. It isn't something I grew out of, but grew into. It just took me a little longer. My accomplishments are not won despite of my dyslexia, but because of my dyslexia. One sleepless night, I decided to give all these amazing helpers that have joined my fight and title. And today I would like to give that title to you. And so as a dyslexic warrior, I define it as a selfless and loving person who sacrifices for people with dyslexia. A dyslexia warrior is a person armed with the right tools, resources, facts, and is seen as a protector of self-esteem for the dyslexic community. I'm so excited for everyone to learn to meet the needs of their students. This is how we change the narrative for our dyslexic children. Parents, you're not alone. Teachers, when you see students in the room, I hope my stories stay with you. After all, the difference between a statistic and a success story is you. Thank you.
It's raffle time. Thank you so much, Donna. What a touching story. Yep. This is for the relaxation basket.
Ready? 883. 883. Woohoo!
Magic.
That's the post-IEP relaxation.
That's DCAT. Family Fun Pack. 884.
Okay, I got that one too. I'm gonna let someone else get that.
Oh, aren't you kind?
That was nice.
778.
Yay!
Dinner and swag. 844.
Yay!
And the last one is the trip. 705.
Yay! Thank you so much to everybody who participated in the raffle and to Jeanette for putting that together. As we close today out, I just want to make sure to thank the NCIDA board and volunteers for your help. A special thanks to Lynn Lozier and Beth Couch, who were instrumental in making this happen, and to our friends at the Hill Center. So thank you. Yes. Thank you all for attending the Day of Dyslexia 2019. I wanted to just close out with a couple of announcements. If you happen to be going to Portland for the national conference, if you will write your name and phone number down, I will like to reach out and we can connect in Portland. Also, just know that the 2021 National IDA Conference will be held in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so we're super excited, and it's going to take a lot of people to make that happen. So we encourage everyone to get invested and involved with the IDA. If you need a certificate of attendance signed by me, I will be at the back table and I will sign those so you can get your credit. And lastly, we will be transitioning to our general membership meeting. So anyone who's interested in sticking around, feel free to attend all that excitement as well. Thank you again for a wonderful day.